Repeat that last submission header, snapped Vaskin Brule, pulling his robe tighter around his neck as the thermal regulators adjusted too late. The diplomatic floor was unusually cold today, not physically, but in presence, cold in posture, cold in arrival. The chamber's main lens irised open overhead, casting pale daylight from the planet's triple star onto the council rotunda. A low series of approval stamps clicked through the tribunal's relay gate 9 in sequence, then a pause. Submission 4047A, droned the relay officer. Origin Terran Assembly, Sol System. Package designation, SDMP. Contents include a stellar decay mitigation protocol, claim backed by gravitational entropy modeling, extragalactic variance calculus, and quantum hinge forecasts. A beat passed. Length, 812 pages. Supplement 4 encoded beacon keys. Terran designation, Rovan Tier. Systems architect, human male. That name sat heavy, for reasons no one could quite place. A few members adjusted their posture, while others smirked beneath ceremonial masks. From the chamber's entrance column, Rovan Tier stepped forward, not imposing, not meek. Dressed in tailored vacuum fiber black, he carried a briefcase, like it weighed memory. No display shimmered, no ambassadorial flourish, just quiet movement. His shoes didn't even echo. He reached the offering console, placed the black case on its surface, unlocked it. The lock released with a hissless seal break. 4 rods emerged. One by one they inserted into the data tines with surgical calm, each rod lit with a different phase color, deep red, heliotropic blue, irregular green, and the final one, white so pale it bent surrounding color. No one spoke. Then, as if obligated by their own expectations, Vaskin Brule tilted forward. Terran delegate, he began, teeth gleaming like weaponry in the overhead lens light. I must commend the punctuality. Your century-long absence certainly gave us time to imagine your return. Rovan said nothing. He didn't even adjust his stance. Brule gestured toward the central display. A stellar decay mitigation protocol. Tell me, Terran, do you believe entropy answers to mathematics? Rovan's eyes met his, unblinking. We don't believe. We mapped it. Gasps didn't erupt. They didn't need to. Disbelief flowed more effectively when subtle. Vaskin exchanged glances with Counselor Gorvek, who offered a slight tilt of his finger, dismissal by gesture. Another counselor, Dren Soval, leaned forward. His fingers hovered over the commentary slate. You claim, he began, slowly, reading directly from the submission, that your protocol identifies repetitive variance decay in stellar torsion harmonics across galactic sectors. These sectors include those we've already stabilized using Concord-approved gravitic hinge systems. He paused. Explain the contradiction. Rovan didn't lift his voice. Your hinge arrays stabilize frequency harmonics on the visible torsion band. Entropy drift occurs in a phase-locked subspectrum you can't resolve. Your instruments aren't wrong. They're blind. That landed like a quiet detonation. Counselor Zeringer clicked something behind his ear, possibly summoning a cross-spectrum scan, but said nothing. Dren shifted. Your solution requires council-wide sync, he said. 4-tier validation across species protocol. That alone disqualifies it. It's not implementable. Rovan didn't argue. He turned his eyes to the far side of the chamber, where the Earth delegation's chair remained unoccupied. He closed the briefcase with one clean motion. We only offered what we knew would fail safely, if ignored. You're threatening us? Vaskin asked, tone velvet but wrapped around iron. No, Rovan replied. We are leaving the file. Whether you choose to open it is your choice. Our offer is one time, one vote, no second version, no adjustment period. He turned, walked to the threshold. The sensors didn't announce his departure. Behind him, the rods dimmed. The console flickered once, then went dormant. Hours later, the commentary thread within the tribunal's relay system bloomed with private side notes. Vaskin Terran posturing. Leave it to the primitives to dress entropy in prophecy. Dren, I flagged the signature for redundancy. File marked for archive rejection. Gorvek, not even a simulation. No consensus. Recommend protocol dismissal. It took 17 seconds to finalize. Rejection signature applied. Protocol entry 4047A. Dismissed. In the isolated silence of archive node Delta 14, the beacon key Earth embedded into its offer, never activated, locked itself into passive state, its internal sequence designed to respond only to council-wide validation, folded inward. Elsewhere, Rovantir's ship entered a null trace fold, no drive signature, no exhaust. Its departure was a subtraction, not a motion, and inside the council chamber, the Earth chair sat still, unfilled, untouched, unremembered. But the rods remained in the console, dim, waiting, until silence became louder than refusal. We're losing axial drift. Repeat, axial drift's breaking parity. The comm channel hissed with incomplete packets as the supervisory controller aboard Drelvo's station scrambled to triangulate the core shift. On the exterior panels, solar shields dimmed automatically as the primary star, a Me 947, dimmed without flare, without surge, without light. It just slowed. Inside Control Bay 4, technicians leaned over heads-up displays which flickered with warnings in deep vermilion. A blue-labeled readout over the plasma interface read, Inertial Mesh Error, Unresolved Reference State. The junior operator, Vrask, adjusted the thermal imaging lens, but found only silence in the upper bands. Core readings, inverted, he murmured, double-checking the feed. There's no rotation phase, nothing radiating. Commander Joran Feld, wide-shouldered and barely willing to consider panic, tapped the edge of the console. It's a sensor ghost. Vrask didn't answer. Not from insubordination, but paralysis. Nothing on the display blinked. No solar waves, no residual flares, not even echo refractions. The sun hadn't erupted. It had paused, frozen mid-burn like an orchestra, holding a suspended note after the conductor walks out. Above them, the observation dome lost contrast as the surrounding light flickered into a dull blue-gray. The technicians didn't speak. Even breathing felt like it would collapse the room. Then came the flickering navgrid. One by one, the relay points winked off. Sync lost, sync lost, sync lost. A comm override bled into the speaker array, static at first, then the fractured voice of a stranded pilot. This is Freight Hauler Corseth, 9 requesting assist. Navlock dropped. Visual markers decoupled. Where's the beacon? Does anyone copy? This is a blind drift. We've got passengers. Joran pushed off the console, spine stiffening. Get orbital drift calculations. Emergency mesh recalibration now. Trying, sir. Systems are non-reactive. Grid vectors show null drift points. It's as if Vrask cut himself short. As if what? As if the anchor's gone. 30 vessels surrounded A947, many civilian class. With the navgrid failing, most of them relied on stellar gravimetric references for balance. Without it, their positional engines defaulted into soft spin mode. Aimless orbital loops calculated on obsolete predictions. Inside the Galactic Council's Capitol Auditorium, laser plasma panels lining the walls flickered with an alert, not a common broadcast, but an emergency systems-wide alert stream. System A947, anomaly registered. Core refraction suspended. Sector navigation disabled. Protocol escalation. 3A. Counselor Vaskin Brule arrived late to the notification chamber, robe still misaligned. What happened? He demanded, addressing the AI steward, which now stood inert. Sir, an officer began, handing him a rapid analysis slate. Star A947 has inverted its radiative layer. There's no thermal signature, no outgoing coronal activity. The system is dark. It's not nova. There's no matter ejection. It just froze. Vaskin scanned the readouts, eyes darting like insects chasing reflected light. Could this be a Class 2 gravitational interference? Binary drag effect? A miscalculation in the hinge arrays? The officer hesitated. There's no drag. The gravitational field is stable, too stable. The star's locked in a non-emissive inertial state. Across the chamber, Counselor Dren Soval stepped in, already pulling telemetry overlays on his display. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, it was flat. This pattern doesn't resemble natural decay. There are no entropy tails. It's clean, sterile. Someone muttered, "That's impossible." The data disagreed. The stranded fleet around A947 spiraled without destination. Inside the Terran Vec shuttle, passengers felt the internal gravitational systems lurch, then plateau into drift. The pilot, Corin Vel, thumped the nav console with a clenched fist. Navgrid went blind. We lost anchor. Gravity lock disengaged. Engines are reading spin drift, but there's no point of reference to calculate trajectory. From the rear, a voice asked, "What does that mean?" Corin didn't look back. "It means we're in motion, but we don't know where or how fast." Outside, the light from the central star was blue-gray now, cold in hue but not in temperature, because there was no temperature, no heat, just arrested momentum, like the cosmos had hit pause on this quadrant alone. Back in the council media wing, Vascan Brule stood before a semicircle of press nodes. The emblems of affected systems rotated slowly behind him. His words were practiced, even if the crisis was new. "This is a localized anomaly. The Council has protocols for stellar fluctuation events. Our technical division is evaluating core phase disruption as a probabilistic irregularity. Is this connected to Earth's recent protocol submission?" a voice asked. Vascan's pause lasted a beat too long. Then that proposal was rejected. Irrelevant to the current event. Was it not about stellar decay? Decay, yes, this is stasis. He turned. The cameras caught only his shoulder. In a quiet observatory on Shirenan moonframe Gore, Volan Near sat cross-legged amid scatterplots and resonance logs. He stared at the latest dataset from A947, overlaying it with his archival copy of Earth's SDMP. The equations weren't identical, but the drift slope was familiar. Too familiar. He scrolled to Earth's section on gravitic hinge deviation across phase-locked star cores. A single line stared back. When synchronization with outer harmonic shells collapses, inertial stillness becomes the default end state, not destruction. Volan exhaled slowly. His own notes were now outdated. He opened a new one. Working theory. Earth's predictions align with observed pattern. Entropy interruption, not increase. Core gravitic decoupling, not flare ejection. This isn't a breakdown, it's a reset. He stared at the phrase. No answer formed, just growing stillness, inside the page and outside the system. From orbit above A947, the Central Council monitoring relay blinked once more. Its final message before falling offline was a single code, status, UN synchronized. Then, nothing. Stop running noise filters. That's not interference. That's structure. Volan Near's fingers hovered over the waveform display, as if the signal itself might shift under his breath. He stared at the raw telemetry feed from the A947 collapse, filtering out system lag, thermal bleed, and phase-mirrored distortion. The waveform didn't flicker. It stepped. Torsion rhythm decoupled from emission, then vanished cleanly. His lab on moonframe Gore felt tighter today. Not physically. It was the same angular chamber filled with scatter papers, grav map projectors, and 8 idle coffee units, but something about the air had changed. It pressed on the back of his neck, whispering questions he hadn't yet written. He pulled up his archive copy of Earth's SDMP proposal. It hadn't been easy to acquire. The Council's mainline access was already throttled. Rejected proposals weren't supposed to be circulated. But Volan had friends in lower clearance tiers, and enough professional pull to request unauthorized educational reference material. He didn't even like humans. He respected systems. Patterns. Any species that could model fourth-stage gravitational decay without supercomputers earned at least a glance. His central projector hummed to life, casting the Terran equations like spectral etchings across the wall. Variable strings danced beside real-time data from A947. It wasn't identical. It was worse. Earth hadn't described what happened. They'd drawn how it starts. He adjusted the projection scale, shrinking Earth's timeline while extending his own observation windows. A947's final state didn't spike. It declined in rhythm, a silent pulse tapering. From the corridor, a researcher, Turv Vikel, one of his post-quantum lens specialists, entered without knocking. "Simulation cores are queuing again," he said, offering a glass pane smeared with sweat from where he'd carried it against his jacket. Server 3's feeding blank heat maps. No coronal data. Volan took the pane, scanned it, and replied with flat certainty. "That's not a data void. That's a real temperature plateau. The corona is no longer emitting." Turv blinked. "A star can't just stop emitting." Volan looked at him, but not directly. "Neither can a pendulum keep swinging when the pivot dissolves." Turv didn't ask what that meant. He backed out quietly. Valen turned his attention back to Earth's document. It was infuriatingly clinical. No flourish, no insistence. Just rows of axiomatic logic, annotated sparsely with comments that seemed deliberately cryptic. Stellar anchors. Variable. Entropy direction. Fixed. Decay model. Harmonic isolation due to artificial inertia. His stylus hovered above the footnote, rewriting it internally. We're measuring gravitic fidelity in isolation. They were mapping in context. He opened a secondary feed, real-time torsion drift from System B212, the next oldest star on the Council's Stellar Stability Index. No active symptoms yet, but the waveform jittered in the same spectral frame Earth had outlined as early decay noise. He highlighted 3 overlapping phases. The match was uncomfortable. Across the campus, a low emergency tone rang, short, clipped, nothing like the dramatics of panic. Just a systems tone used when silence wouldn't be noticed. Valen kept working. At midday, he entered the Senar Interspecies Research Pavilion, a long glass-shelled observatory, filled with scholars, analysts, and artificial intelligence avatars. The Council had summoned a summit, quietly. No media, just data. A lean officer from the Pulranar Accord stood at the center terminal, filtering decay scans through a real-time heads-up lattice, suspended by 5 anchor nodes. System A947 collapsed without any radiative breach, he stated. No signs of core breach, matter rejection, or magnetic instability. It simply transitioned into inertial null. Valen raised a hand. The officer gestured. Dr. Neer, are we examining torsion slope decay? Valen asked, plugging in his private slate. Earth's protocol outlined gravitic lag frames hours before their event models ended. If we overlay those decay windows on systems B through E, we'll find matching phase offsets. Some muttered. Others exchanged stares. A Talvethian researcher, iridescent in hue and 3-limbed, swayed forward. Terran protocol has no active Council validation. Referencing it violates archival containment. Valen didn't blink. Soda's losing more stars. He flicked his slate toward the projection net. The data unfolded across the nodes. Earth's projection in gray, Council observations in multicolor overlay. The result wasn't elegant. It was accusatory. Every system on the map that had shown early instability now aligned, almost uncomfortably, with Terran calculations. Not in symptom, but in rhythm. A silence followed. The quiet kind, not from reverence, but procedural blockage. Finally, the Pulranar officer spoke again. The Council has issued a signal suppression order. No patterns are to be announced publicly until central analysis completes its chain of evidence review. Valen narrowed his gaze. And how long does entropy wait for review? No answer came, just the muted folding of reports as the meeting was logged into containment archives. Outside, the stars didn't flicker. They dimmed, slowly, faithfully, like a clock no longer wound, but still ticking. That night, Valen sat alone in his observatory, simulation papers unfolded like cartographers' scrolls around him. He ran Earth's SDMP again, using current data. The output didn't scream. It flattened. Final status, inertial phase projection confirmed gravitic harmonic unsynchronized entropy anchor. Irreversible Volan opened the Council transmission node, but paused before uploading. The Terran file had been rejected by signature. His would be dismissed by category. So instead, he began building a silent copy, flagged not by protocol but urgency. Because somewhere beyond that Council wall, Earth already knew. And if their math held, B212 would die in 6 days. System C139. Just flickered off-grid. Skip the diagnostics. Go visual now. Commander Kor Varnek's voice dropped into the channel like weight through water, sending every station in the orbital command tier into full recalibration. The Drenvale strategic array, once used to triangulate enemy fleet clusters, now watched its own stars die. 4 more heads-up displays blinked into redline silence, one after another. Entire sectors dimmed, not violently, not with noise, but in gravitational decay, systemic, synchronized, and beyond containment. He leaned forward against the projection table, watching pulse trace data from systems D802, F994, E300, and G112 collapse into flatline variants. The navgrid server in the lower quadrant tried auto-repair but failed at sync initialization. Run fallback mesh analysis, Core barked. The sensor technician didn't move. Sir, fallback mesh is unanchored. Every relay node's lost gravitic tethering. Then chart the drift manually. There's no drift, the tech said, throat dry. There's nothing left to drift from. A silence deeper than failure washed over the room. Varnak turned toward the ops coordinator. Wake Soval, tell him we need the Earth file unlocked. You mean the SDMP? I mean the thing we buried under smug votes and layered protocol seals. Tear it open. Across the command bay, the event map pulsed, soft tones marking system collapses as if announcing late guests to a doomed banquet. Inside Council Archive Room 17C, Dren Soval stood in a heatless chamber filled with isolation vaults. The walls shimmered with laser-sealed decision markers. One glowed blue, untouched since validation. Entry 4047A, Earth Proposal SDMP. He keyed his palm print into the restriction interface. A brief flicker ran down the spine of the access panel, then a cold green line split the marker, and a single query appeared. UN Lock Archive. This action overrides rejection signature. Soval hesitated. His fingers hovered for a moment too long. Then, without drama, he confirmed the unlock. The chamber's central cylinder dropped from the ceiling, hissing only once as the data core spun to life. Inside, the Terran beacon protocol blinked red. A message read, Beacon sync disabled, multi-species validation, not achieved, status, nullified. He exhaled sharply. They designed it to require consensus, he muttered. No override, no unilateral engagement. His assistant stood behind him, arms crossed. That's not a failsafe, that's a deadlock. No, Soval turned, eyes fixed. That's the condition we imposed. Earth just wrote it down. In Council Command Center Theta 4, Core Varnak convened an emergency strategic session. Laser plasma boards displayed 6 sectors blinking yellow, 3 orange, 1 black. The color code wasn't for urgency, it marked stellar operability. Black meant inertial silence. The room felt submerged in decisions that could no longer move. We need to replicate Earth's model, Core said, pacing. Even without full activation, we can reverse engineer the mathematics. I want decay slope overlays on every Tier 1 system. A subordinate in dark uniform answered quickly. Volan Neer's published correlation logs align with 5 of the dead stars. His notes reference Earth's gravitic drift modeling almost line for line. So we know it works, Core said. We know it would have worked, the officer corrected. Without activation, the beacon is non-reactive. The corrections were broadcast triggers, synchronizing field stabilities across systems with council-wide agreement. That consensus never arrived. A third strategist leaned in. We denied the ignition point. Core's fists clenched behind his back. Then we built our collapse by vote. On the outer shell of Sector Relay E300, stranded vessel Pharaoh's Shade spun in slow tilt. Its guidance array blinked incomprehensible data. No stellar mass, no radiation, no drift signature. Captain Harvin Vox scanned what was left of his starfield. His engineer's voice crackled over the intercom. Backup systems are running but navigation fails every recalibration. It's like we're floating on an unfinished equation. Outside, the stars remained still. Light still existed, but it no longer guided. Vox looked toward the remains of the Council's trust and whispered, "What did we miss?" The relay behind him displayed one final message before blinking out, System E300, sync rejection log recovered. Then nothing. Within the intelligence chamber of the Concord Planetary Core, the SDMP simulation ran in silent resolve. Volan Neer's annotated model laid itself over failing star grids. Each match brought the same time stamp. Earth had forecasted the decays with mathematical quietude. Core stood over the table, brow drawn. Is there any way to fool the beacon into thinking consensus occurred? Volan considered the question not as a physicist, but as someone who had now read Earth's intent. They didn't lock it to security. They tied it to structure. The moment rejection logged across species protocol chains, the beacon sealed itself. The architecture was meant to be collaborative by physics, not by trust. So it's irreversible. No, Volan said, it's already reversed. We're just catching up to the results. The central command room dimmed once more. 3 more stars reported torsion slope decay, no ejections, no radiation, just structural stop. Core stepped toward the edge of the situation table, eyes heavy with clarity. What's next? Someone asked from behind. Core didn't answer. He just watched another dot fade from the display and said, "We built a gate, they offered a key, and we snapped it before checking the lock." From orbit above the collapsing rim of Sector F-994, the last nav buoy pinged Earth's original checksum file before blackout. It returned a single response: validation not achieved. There would be no reply. Run it again. No assumptions this time. Core Varnek's voice cut across the Council's command tier, cold and clipped. His knuckles pressed into the console edge, as if sheer force could anchor the crumbling logic collapsing around them. The laser plasma display above him scrolled one line of static blue, sync failed, beacon untriggered around the room. Hands moved fast, but eyes moved faster. Strategies unraveled at the pace of unread replies. Counselor Dren Soval, face gaunt, stood at the access ring of comm substation Delta 2, where Earth's archival node had been buried. His authority key rotated in the receiver, 3 full turns, and the node accepted the clearance with a descending tone. The chamber's light dimmed as a circular terminal emerged from the floor, lined in Terran cold alloy. The archive reader blinked to life. The display showed 4 things. File, SID DAME _1.0_ Terran origin status. Dormant activation key, unavailable response node. Null. Soval tapped the input line again, slower this time. Attempting re-engagement with Solnet comms, nothing answered. The engineer at his side lowered his voice. Earth's relay mesh is gone. No trace echoes, no directional pings, no fallback registry. They've folded from tracking. He turned. Define the pattern. It's not masking, the engineer said. It's absence. 3 decks below, Volan Near scrolled through Earth's embedded protocol log on a scratch screen interface. The equations weren't decorative, they were executable. But the core initiation was locked behind a now-failed multi-species consensus header. Beacons not passive, he muttered, flipping back to the embedded instructions authored by Halvik Tor, a Terran coder whose name never appeared in any diplomatic transcript, only in the side metadata Earth included on a separate thread. That file wasn't formatted for policy approval, it was a procedural handoff, a final footnote. He ran a checksum across the beacon gate sequence, each quadrant aligned perfectly, until the last variable spat red. Multi-link response header. Incomplete vote quorum, 3/4 final entry. Rejection logged. Archive sealed. Volan stared at the line. They wrote it to wait for us, and when we said no, it listened. From the wall, the heads-up display tracking gravitic torsion decays shifted. Star D-228 entered inertial freeze. System G-990 followed 2 minutes later. Flares gone. Field strength null. And still the beacon stayed silent. He keyed into Earth's comm log one final time, and ran a direct line. Connecting to Solnet node. Error, node erased. Error, tracer route failure status. Non-existent obligate. Even the failure felt intentional. In the adjacent planning chamber, Core stood beside strategist Velen Carr, who was reviewing last-minute simulations under red lighting. Lines of force projected data snaked over his shoulders. "We can't rebuild the beacon," Velen said. "It's tied to original reference signatures, structured into Earth's own astronomical calibration constants. We don't even share the same rotational units. Can we replicate one? Replication without reference is forgery. Even if we succeed in mimicking the surface algorithm, the quantum handshake requires origin validation. Their beacon knows if it's been altered." Core stepped away from the display. "Then Earth didn't just offer us a tool, they offered themselves as the keystone." Velen nodded, "And when we turned them down, they took the key with them." Back in Archive Delta 2, Soval replayed the final sync attempt, 24 times, each with a different algorithmic override. The display didn't stutter, it didn't flicker, it simply responded with a single output after every attempt. Sync channel, permanently nullified. Protocol status, retired on Council rejection. He turned to the engineer. "What happens when we force run the corrections manually?" "Without activation, the equations only simulate. They do not propagate into the field. It's like entering a doorway we welded shut." Soval sat back in his chair, shoulders low. "We're calling the architect, and the building already collapsed." On the outer sensor decks, the Star Map Control Center logged 6 new stellar nullifications. The rhythm of collapse was accelerating. What once took days was now counted in hours. Volan crossed the corridor carrying Earth's final simulation stack, now stripped of its procedural veil. The core model described not aggression, but entropy accommodation, a framework meant to stabilize cosmic torsion by syncing external harmonics across shared fields. He found Core at the main relay spire, eyes fixed on the nav wall. Neither of them spoke for a time. Then Volan offered, "We never decoded their mathematics. We dismissed it as redundant, assumed if it wasn't militarized it wasn't relevant." Core turned slowly. "They weren't trying to outbuild us. They were trying to warn us, subtly enough that only listeners would hear." Volan hesitated, "And we never listened." The center console rang once. Another node fell. An alert tone pulsed from the central command system, flat, quiet, final. The Terran archive line was now officially marked. Status, null and null, no trace signatures, no residual pulses, not even residual gravitational shadow. Soval keyed in one final attempt, manual override via Council encryption. The display offered nothing. Then seconds later, a slow red line scrolled down the center of the screen. Sync attempt, logged timestamp, too late, and beneath it, the last seal, continuity denied. Structure retired. Outside the Council, stars still turned, but fewer now. Light arrived thinner, and Earth remained unspoken, not silent out of pride, but design. They had offered a hand to a collapsing wall, and when it was refused, they had done what architects must: withdraw the blueprint, let entropy finish what consensus denied. Sector Delta 8 just blacked out. No navgrid, no field return, no stellar trace. Confirming now. That's our last anchor in the curless spiral. Storn Revik dropped the report onto the comm cradle and pivoted to the transit bay's central control node, the light of his heads-up interface crawling over his narrowed eyes. The last functioning gravitic hinge, node 9931, mapped to star V127, was flickering, its harmonics slipping out of phase like a pendulum catching air. The simulation screen beside it offered no errors, just a silence too perfect to compute. Lock remaining routes, and reroute quantum drift systems through the fallback corridor. We'll use the archive calibration bands. His tone didn't rise. Only the rate of his commands betrayed urgency. Behind him, 2 technicians ran manual overlays on translucent projection sheets. The AI usually handled this in milliseconds. But the AI wasn't answering. "We're not syncing," one of them muttered. "Drift is flat. Jump coordinates won't hold. They're folding into non-solvable derivatives." Storn's lips thinned. "Because we're calculating against dying reference points." He turned to the evacuation coordinator nearby. "Issue full withdrawal for the Veltra line. If they wait for auto-correction, they'll drift blind into vacuum decay. Transit ships won't align without stellar magnetics. They'll fly dark." From the Council's central relay sphere, an entire sector of star map lights dimmed within 6 minutes. There were no warnings, no surges. The system board didn't even crash. It simply redrew itself with fewer points. Black space replaced each nameplate. Labels became relics. The map technician stared at the screen and whispered, "We're watching memory dissolve." The supervisor keyed in emergency override codes to reactivate planetary stabilization AI for the Garn perimeter. No response. The code itself returned incomplete, half-translated, misaligned with what the system now interpreted as input noise. Command logs across 12 systems reflected identical outcomes. System H744, Gravitic Field Silent AI Response. Null Navgrid Sync. Broken planetary rotation. Untracked stellar state. Inertial freeze inside the Veltran command bunker. Core Varnik reviewed emergency filings from planetary governors, who hadn't spoken to orbit in over an hour. Not because comms were jammed. Because no signal bounced back. "The drift nets are degrading," one analyst said, fingers twitching over a thermal diagnostic panel. "They're clinging to frame state, but without solar reference the AI filters are collapsing. Manual override. Requires gravitic synchronization," the analyst replied. "Which, respectfully, doesn't exist anymore." In the sub-quantum control basin beneath the Council's core archive vault, Storn Revik opened the fail-safe drawer, a procedure reserved for system-wide infrastructure breaches. Inside, a long-thought-obsolete device sat in polished casing, the Delta Pulse Activator, designed to force reactivate the drift core for planetary nav systems under full-field blackout. He keyed in the current star code anchor for System B-224. The command line responded with a neutral field reading. He activated the pulse. Nothing happened. The system hadn't rejected it. It simply didn't register the command. The field hadn't changed. The field didn't exist. The pulse rang once, then stilled. On orbiting vessel Trakar's Mercy, stranded near the edge of the Grinion corridor, Chief Pilot Vel Arner called down to the ground station. "We're locked in freefall rotation, no solar reference, no AI tracking. I'm reading artificial mass drift, but the navgraph is empty. Everything's still but moving." Static returned. Inside the chamber, his navigator stood near the viewport. No stars moved, no glow. The sector didn't flicker. It waited, unfinished. "It feels," the navigator whispered, "like the sky gave up." The central Starlink room updated its live feed one final time. It showed only 32 stars still responding to standard spectrum scans. 6 minutes later, the number dropped to 23. Each blink wasn't a flash. It was an absence. Back in the Council's emergency chamber, Kor stood at the center dais while Volan Nair traced field collapse data across the final threads of Earth's untriggered protocol. "They didn't kill anything," Volan said. Kor didn't respond. "They offered an answer, and when we turned it down, they removed the question." From the wall, a final warning triggered. AI processing halted, field anchor lost. Then the lights dimmed, not from power loss, but from recalibrated reality. Stars were not burning, they were stalling. Storn Revik stood in the drift basin's black chamber, staring at the last flicker of the primary hinge before it went still. One red line hovered over the console. System node black, no alerts, no explosion, just a final full stop. He stepped back from the controls, not in surrender, but in knowledge. They had built their world atop assumptions about stars, and Earth had simply withdrawn the math. Outside, in every system still spinning, rotations continued, but orbits lost meaning. No stars, no sync, only motion without memory. "I signed it without review." Dren Soval's voice, drained and dry, echoed against the tribunal's stone vault. There were no objections, no interruptions, only the soft buzz of data capture units flickering red across the testimony tier. The chamber's light was angled, throwing long silhouettes onto the curved floor, the kind of light designed for truths that couldn't be retracted. A laser plasma screen hovered above him, displaying the original rejection marker from entry 4047A. Each line of the protocol denial, time-stamped, flagged, finalized, scrolled upward like the minutes of a trial already judged by silence. Council vote, invalidate proposal. 4047A signatory, Dren Soval status, rejected vertical bar, archived vertical bar, voided. Soval didn't blink as the signature played on loop. His face remained still, every wrinkle sharpened by internal collapse. In his hands, the override key he had used sat like a rusted relic, symbolic, powerless, undeserved. "Did you consider the vote's consequence at the time of rejection?" asked Councillor Harnik Vel, leaning forward, arms clasped behind his back, tone neutral but bruised. "I considered it irrelevant," Soval answered. "Their models challenged our validation structure. I deemed it incompatible." Across the aisle, Volan Nair stood beside the projection deck, fingers resting on the edge of a tall archive pillar, the SDMP decode array cast in rotating translucence. Dozens of harmonic curves spun mid-air, interacting not through numbers, but through tethered fields. "We never understood the file," Volan said, "because we filtered it through ego." He tapped the central function node. A ripple unfolded. "Gravitic drift calibration, delta-coded, requires convergent sync across multispecies harmonic baselines." "They didn't just want agreement," he continued. "They encoded the protocol to only activate through shared math. No override, no deception. Consensus had to be the signal." The chamber didn't flinch. It simply darkened. From the east wall, a second feed displayed the Council's primary system collapse log. Blackout entries scrolled like terminal diagnoses. Sectors lost, anchors severed, drift paths unfixable. None showed interference. All listed gravitic silence as cause. Earth's offer wasn't contingent on goodwill, Volan added. It was conditional on trust being proven through compatibility. Kor Varnek entered from the side, his uniform charred at the collar, evacuation soot from the outer observatory corridors, where drift correction systems had failed only hours earlier. He carried no datapad, only a thin strip of worn parchment, a printed copy of the first Terran line. When stabilization is denied, entropy proceeds without instruction. He handed it to Soval. You didn't just deny Earth, you denied your own correction. Soval looked at the text, lips barely moving. We were told it was a threat in disguise. You assumed math was a weapon, Kor said. They never raised their voice. A tone pinged across the upper wall, an incoming broadcast from a dead system. Not a distress call, a final sync attempt from a drift satellite over system L-221. The message read, Stellar Vector, Inertial Null Contact, No Earth Response Request, Retrospective Error, Ada Mushan Response. The feed stopped. Volan keyed into the overlay again. That node was marked for Earth's validation. Its signature matched Terran modulation curves. But because the proposal was rejected at quorum, that signature was never answered. The beacon needed agreement to become action. Then there was never sabotage. Vel said, voice cracking beneath calm. Only a missing handshake. Volan nodded. They didn't hurt us. They predicted what would happen when we refused to listen. Behind the tribunal seating wall, Earth's empty chair sat in static spotlight. It hadn't moved since their exit. The headrest bore no emblem. The data port below remained clean, untouched. No delegation, no envoy, no reply. Just the shape of a seat that had once offered structure, and then vanished when dismissed. Soval walked toward it, every step pulling dust beneath his boots. He didn't sit. He placed the signature tablet on the desk, and let the system scan his iris. Then slowly, he triggered the review playback of the vote session. The voices echoed back. Too optimistic, mathematical vanity, unaligned with council tempo, recommend denial, archive with footnote. Each voice came from seats now empty. Some of those voices belonged to systems no longer traceable. Some of them echoed from lips that no longer existed. The head clerk of the tribunal turned to Soval. Do you formally retract your signature? Soval stared at the rejection log one final time. No. Confused glances flicked around the chamber. He continued. Retraction implies correction. There's no function left to repair. Earth offered continuity. We chose collapse. The log must remain exactly as it was written. He looked at the projection. Let history study our error, as an artifact, not an edit. The chamber stood quiet as the final line of the SDMP file glowed against the center display. Structure requires invitation. Refuse it, and what remains is the natural end state. No one spoke again that day. They simply watched the screen, and remembered what silence had told them. Counselor, something's triggering the sealed nodes. The technician's voice cracked over the empty transmission room, now operating with only 2 staff members, all others reassigned or gone entirely. The final systems weren't transmitting alerts anymore. They were echoing them. From the central heads-up panel, old data signatures began to light up, not with live feeds but playback headers. The registry blinked as archival packets unlatched one by one, each tagged with the same hashed imprint, Entry Origin, Earth Protocol SDMP 4047A, Trigger Council Rejection Hash, Confirmed, Condition. Final state broadcast initiated. On the adjacent screen the central nav map, now blank, now starless, remained still. It had not updated since Node Black. No drift, no flare, just a muted black field where data once bloomed. Volan Near entered the control vault. He'd stopped wearing his formal band 2 days ago. His hands were ink-stained from field notes, unwashed. His voice was lower, not from fatigue, but from knowing it couldn't rise high enough to undo what had followed them. Let it run, he said. No one argued. The console lights dimmed, replaced by a slow-spinning sphere of dark blue. Inside it, a Terran voice, unmistakable, quiet, almost reverent, began to speak. To those who received this, you are among the ones who refused. The voice was male, not harsh, not proud. It had a mathematical rhythm to it, measured cadence, like it had been structured to match decay slope. You were not attacked, you were informed. Kor Varnak, standing beside the far railing, looked up at the display. He didn't speak. There were no orders left to give. Entropy was not sent to you. It arrived on schedule. What failed was not your stars. What failed was your consensus. Across the chamber, the Earth chair remained lit by soft perimeter light. Its vacancy now had gravity. We extended correction, not control. You declined continuity. So we did not continue. On every node across now defunct systems, where rejection logs had once been stamped, this message pulsed once, triggered by their own decision. It required no Earth signal. The playback was not a broadcast. It was a loop sealed into the logic chain of their dismissal. Structure demands invitation. Rejection seals collapse. Soval listened from the rear corridor, not seated, not standing straight. His face didn't move. He watched the center of the display, where the Earth Protocol's final flag rotated one last time. This was not silence. This was restraint. You were never conquered. You were never dismissed. The voice dimmed further. You chose conclusion. We complied. And then, without sound, without announcement, the display began folding itself inward, pixels dimming from the center, leaving a fading outline of a data seal marked in a single symbol. UNIURL in the Council's formal registry, the final entry under Earth's name activated on cue. It was brief. Status, retired. Access, forbidden. Legacy, Ac Noel Jed. Reason, terminal consensus failure. One technician turned from his console. It's not looping. Volan nodded. It was only meant to be heard once. Outside, the starfields no longer existed in real-time projection. What remained was a black canvas. No blinking roots, no radiant anchors, just a museum of unlit memory. Core stepped to the center floor. Mark the seal permanent. Leave the protocol untouched. Soval finally spoke. We record errors to learn. Core turned. We record this because it was final. Volan added, softly, they never stopped the stars. They just stopped offering the answer. From the right side display, Earth's entry collapsed into archive status. The header glowed red once, then faded into non-directory status. The screen scrolled its last time. Earth status, UNIURL delegation, withdrawn response function. Irrevocable closure. Ac Noel Jed. No further replies were possible, not because Earth chose not to answer, but because they no longer existed within the systems designed to ask. Outside the chamber, corridor lights dimmed on schedule. Power reroutes would no longer matter, and in every dead system, the echo of one final message remained embedded in rejection markers, coded not as warning, not as threat, but as an autopsy. You declined continuity. Nothing else needed to be said, because now, there was nothing left to say.